Hey, greetings and welcome to our broadcast today. I'm Pastor Michael Hailey. This is New Day Live, and I'm concluding a series today with a message that I think will really be a good one for you. I want to begin by telling you a story. He was nicknamed the Man of Steel, S-T-E-A-L. Rickey Henderson is widely regarded even today as baseball's greatest leadoff hitter and base runner. He holds the major league record for the most stolen bases and the most runs scored. And in 2009, he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame on the very first ballot, which is a big deal for those guys. Now, though he was a gifted athlete, he admits he was not necessarily a financial genius when he first came into the league. Let me give you an example. When he signed with the Oakland A's in 1979, he received a $1 million signing bonus. Now, this was back when $1 million was actually $1 million. I mean, so it was a lot of money, right? Can you guess what he did with that check? Well, I won't tell you just yet, but I will tell you in a few minutes at the end of this message, okay? You're going to enjoy this. Today, I'm continuing my Radical series, actually concluding it, with a teaching I'm calling Radical NonGrace. And we'll be looking at the same story as last week that was told by Jesus in Luke chapter 15. Luke, his disciple, recorded it all for us because not only was there a brother who rebelled against the father and left home, like we talked about last week, we call him the prodigal son. Not only was there this brother who rebelled against his father and left home, there was another brother who stayed home, but turned out to be maybe even more rebellious than the one who left. Now, you remember last week, the story goes like this, basically. Here's this young man, and he decides he wants his inheritance. He's not supposed to get it until the father dies, but he demands the inheritance from his father. And so the father gives it to him, and he gathers up all the rest of his stuff and takes his leave and goes off from his little country home into a big city, where the Bible says he squandered and wasted all of his wealth with riotous or immoral living. And the Bible also says that when he was there, and he had lost everything that he had, when he used everything up, no more resources, then all of a sudden, to add insult into injury, there was a famine that came across, swept all across the land. And the young man had to resort to slopping hogs for a pig owner, which was a great indignity for a Jewish young man. He had to slop the hogs and was so hungry, he desired to eat even what the pigs were eating. And one day he came to himself, if you remember the story, and he said, wow, you know what? I need to go home. My dad has so much to give and so much to spare. I think I'll just go home and just fall on my face in front of him and ask him to take me back and to forgive me. And so he had this speech all ready to go. He makes his way down the road. His father comes running to him because the father is so glad to see him. They embrace one another, and the young man starts in with his confession. Oh, Father, I have sinned against you and against God. I'm sorry. And right in the middle of that, the father stops him, probably while they were still embraced, and looks at his workers and said, hey, my son who is dead is alive. My son who was gone is now come home. Let's kill the fatted calf and celebrate. Let's have a party because my son has come home. And you remember from last week, they all partied, right? Well, not all of them. Watch this. In verse 25, the Bible says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and the dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he is back home safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. Now, before we get into this, let me explain radical ungrace, because it's basically the antithesis of radical grace. For instance, in the world of non-grace, we earn approval by our achievements. Achieve and you advance, don't achieve and you don't advance. It's quid pro quo, something for something. And we learn it as early as kindergarten or so, where after being tested, some are slotted for advanced classes while others are slotted for remedial. Or if you work, you get paid. If you don't work, well, it used to be if you don't work, you didn't get paid, right? But if it's, and it's not just work, it's life period. It's always that way. Just ask the prodigal. In fact, remember from last week, there was another version of this story in Jewish literature. And in that version, the father rejected this wayward son when he came home, and he gave him what he deserved, which was condemnation. The old shame on you. Does that sound familiar? But when Jesus told this story, that's not what happened. He altered the ending of the story. Because in Jesus' story, the dad says, hey, we're going to party tonight. My son whom I love has come home. Now, here's the question this morning. Did you grow up in a home where non-grace ruled? In other words, did you feel the best way to get one or both of your parents to approve of you was by your performance? Did you feel that if you made better grades and if you kept your room clean, your parents would love you more? Or at least they would express their love more to you? Does that sound familiar? Or maybe you felt unloved and you convinced yourself that you didn't deserve to be loved as much as maybe one of your brothers or your sisters. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about non-grace today. And how, if that sounds like you and the way you were raised or the situation you're in right now, how we can get beyond it. And I want to give you two things to hang some truth on today. Number one is this. Non-grace affects the way we see other people. In verse 28, it says, the older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders one time. Yet you never gave me so much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. Now, think about that. How many of you know that's a performance-based statement that he just made? Here was this son, and he was a son, but he worked like a slave on his father's homestead there. He worked like a slave in order to win his father's acceptance. His view of his father was this man will love me if I work hard for him. But when he learned that his father did not play by the rules of non-grace and that he was actually forgiving the younger brother, he became angry. Why? Because in his non-grace world, it was all about getting what you deserve. And by the way, did you get verse 30 that I read? He said, when this son of yours has squandered his property or your property with prostitutes, when he comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. His animosity was so great, he couldn't even bring himself to say, my brother, could he? He said, your son, right? Putting the blame on the dad. And he also said that his brother had spent all of his father's money on prostitutes. That detail wasn't even a part of Jesus' story. Interesting. Maybe the older brother was projecting, but for sure, he was trying to make things sound even worse than they actually were. And maybe in his heart, they were that bad. Now, at first glance, it appears this older brother has a legitimate complaint. I mean, he's been good. He stayed at home. He's worked in the fields for his father. Yet his prodigal brother, in the midst of a mess, waltzes home and he gets a party. So he was like, are you kidding me? This can't be right. By the way, I've always criticized this older brother for his lack of understanding of grace. But I don't think I should have done that, really. Because the problem isn't that he doesn't understand grace. It is that he just doesn't like grace. Because he believes that relationships are based upon keeping the rules. It's about crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. I can remember back in my own life when I was a legalist, when I was this rules keeper guy and rules keeper pastor. Man, if I missed my Bible reading or scheduled prayer time more than a couple of days in a row, oh, the shame of it all that I heaped on myself. In fact, you can go back and look at my older journals and the entries I made in those journals where the next day I was confessing to God my sin of neglect and begging God for strength to just do better the next day. I can remember making a promise to God one time that I was going to go out and witness my faith and tell people about Jesus. I was going to do that to at least one person every day before I went to bed each night. I actually left my house late at night more than a few times to go find someone at McDonald's or Quick Stop that I could witness to. Now, I ask myself time and again, why didn't I show myself a little grace back then? Because I made a promise, and I couldn't break a promise. I mean, after all, it was the rule, and rules always trump grace, at least for a non-grace person, for a legalist, a Pharisee type individual. Another reason this older brother didn't like grace was because grace is not fair. You see, this older brother needs the father's grace just as much as the younger brother, but he would rather earn his father's approval through hard work and obeying all the rules. That way, he could feel superior to his younger brother and everyone else on his father's farm. But that's just not how grace works, is it? Grace is God's gift to us with no conditions, no provisions, no strings attached. And aren't you glad that's the way it is? Boy, I sure am. Because that means all people are loved. It means all the people are accepted by God, even those we think don't deserve to be accepted. Like in the story, sinners, tax collectors, older brothers, prodigal son, the Pharisees, the lawyers, the politicians. Well, maybe that's taking it a little too far right now. Right now, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Oh, and you and me as well. It includes us. Now, I want you to say this out loud. Even me? Just say it. Even me? And my response is yes, even you. Now, number two, the second thing I want you to hang some truth on is this statement. Ungrace affects the way we see God. Not just the way we see others, but the way we see God. Now, let me read those verses again to you, beginning in verse 28. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me so much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. Now, do you hear what he's saying? After all I have done for you, after being such a good person, after all the commands I've followed, you never gave me so much as a goat. Father, I have a long record of doing good. And what do I get? Nothing. That's where he was at. That's the condition of his heart. Now, let me ask you this. Do you know people like that? Or better still, could we be people like that? I mean, at least at times. That when things go wrong in our lives, the first words out of our mouth are, listen, God, listen, after all I've done for you, how could you let this happen to me? How could this thing happen to the one I love so much after all I've done for you? And then we list the reasons as to why he should bless us and why we should be treated better than others, better than those people. This is really dangerous and subtle. And do you know why? Because it has to do with control. We are subtly and unconsciously trying to manipulate God by saying, because I'm good, because I have done good, because I've followed the rules, you owe it to me, God, to treat me better. But think about this. When we want just the blessings and the stuff of life, aren't we ignoring the love relationship we have with God? That's a rhetorical question. The answer is yes, of course. That's why it's a good thing to check your motives from time to time. Why do you do what you do? Well, when we try to be good, when we read the Bible, when we pray, we ought to be asking the question alongside those things, why? Why am I doing those things? Is it because I learn of God and I learn of myself and I spend time with Him? Or is it that I'm afraid if I don't do those things, I will not get the blessing and the things that I want? You see, that's how most of us have been raised, the theology that most of us have been raised in. Let me show you how it works in verse 31. Verse 31 says, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me." By the way, that's God's presence. "And everything I have is yours." That's God's provision, His presence and His provision. Now get this. The younger son lost the father's presence and provision because he left the father's house. The older son lost his father's provision and presence because he left the father in his heart. He never physically ran away. He just dutifully remained at home with his father, doing everything he thought he was supposed to do. And he let insecurity and anger and jealousy and bitterness overwhelm his heart toward his father and brother. Now that's very sad when you think that through, isn't it? It's sad because all he had to do was receive the grace his father truly offered both his sons and then simply enjoy living in it. Listen, that's a challenge for you today. If you can come to that place to just rest in God, to just rest in His grace that He offers you freely, and then enjoy living in it. Enjoy the life, the abundant life that Jesus promises us. So, when Ricky Henderson entered professional baseball, he received this $1 million signing bonus, which came to him via a check in the mail. But now watch this. Instead of cashing that check, he framed it and put it up on his wall to remind himself that he was now a millionaire. Well, almost a year later, the accountant for the team realized the books weren't balancing. He was off by, what do you think? He was off by $1 million. You see where this is going, don't you? Of course, he traced the error, discovering that Ricky had never cashed his check. So he contacted him and he asked him about it. And Ricky said, "Well, it's right here." He said, "Well, where?" He said, "Well, it's hanging on my wall." The bookkeeper said, "Ricky, that's not the way it's done. Cash the check, deposit it, and then you hang the canceled check on the wall." And that's what Ricky did. Here's the truth of that story. He wasn't a millionaire just because he'd been given a check, was he? He had to cash that check to officially be a millionaire. Now, wow. Can you imagine receiving $1 million check and not cashing it? I can't. I'm with you. Well, listen, this is great, by the way. Through Christ, we have been given, let's say, a gazillion-dollar check called grace. Because, in fact, Jesus is grace. And we never have to work to earn Him. He is ours as God's perfect gift to us. The only thing He requires is that we experience Him. And not only experience Him, but just learn to enjoy Him. And the more that happens, the more others will take notice and want to experience and enjoy Him too. Because most everyone you know and relate to desires to know that there is a God who will love them unconditionally and patiently walk with them on their life journey. Will you take that to heart this week? Okay, that's it for me today. Time's up. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for supporting this ministry through your prayers and through your financial giving. If I can help you or pray for you this week, let me know. Contact me on our website, newdaychurchbrandon.org. Contact me on social media. Send me a personal message if you want to. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'd love to be able to answer any questions you have or to offer prayers for you. And by the way, I have an email list that we generate some kind of encouraging word every week and try to send it out. If you would like to be on that list, let me know also. Send it to me in your email address in a message, and I'll put you on there. And I promise you can opt off of it anytime you want to, okay? So I hope you have a great week. Enjoy Jesus, who is your grace. Will you do that? I'll see you next week. God bless you. Bye-bye.